Hi, everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar event put on by Novastar Prep. I know some people might still be joining, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time, knowing that it's 6:01 and we have a lot to cover related to building the college admissions profile over several years. So I did want to get us started. I see some people still coming in, um, take it easy, get your seat, get ready, and get comfy as we go over all these topics. As we dive in, if anyone here is unfamiliar with Novastar Prep, you just check out the services that we offer here before we dive into tonight's content. Certainly very much related to tonight's content in the sense that we offer comprehensive tutoring services to help out with that GPA and everything you're looking for college. Test prep, certainly the SAT, ACT, and anything else that you may need. College readiness coaching, certainly very pertinent to tonight's conversation. And we offer dedicated support to students and families so that you're really on top of how the tutoring's going and that you can really get a chance to connect with the staff here and make sure that everything's going smoothly and check up on that progress as your students go through it. But as I mentioned, this is an overview of the services we offer. There's very rarely a subject we cannot tutor. And so please feel free to reach out to us if you're looking for anything in particular. Tonight, though, in particular, we are going to be talking about building the admissions profile. And we say new approaches in a new era, but for those of us working in admissions, it seems to change every year or, every 5 years or so, some major change occurs or something happens that we need to account for in the admissions process. So we have some updates here that will be helpful as you're helping your students prepare for college admissions, younger students trying to build their profile up over the years, and general support for kind of trying to differentiate yourself as you're looking through the college admissions process and trying to figure out what the best next step is. So certainly we'll be covering quite a few different topics across this tonight. And as right before we get started, I do want to let you all know that we are recording tonight's webinar. You will receive a link to it where you can watch it again whenever you'd like. You can share it with friends, share it with your students, and highlight any points. Feel free to screenshot anything that might be of use to you. And then the other housekeeping item would be that while the chat is disabled, our Q&A is open. So I have it here on my second screen. If questions come up as we're going throughout, feel free to pop them in there. And then also, we'll have time at the end for a Q&A and any questions that I can answer for you all. And so a couple things on our agenda tonight. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and then we'll talk about the evolving landscape of college admissions. So again, those will be the changes we've noticed over the last several years and kind of what we are looking ahead to. And then we'll talk about starting early and planning ahead, really looking at your extracurriculars and diversifying them a bit so that you're standing out from other students. Talking about it's more than just grades, kind of what the other academic components are to the admissions process, and telling your story. So this would be how you can help your student really frame their story over years and then down the road when they're actually writing the essay. And then last but not least, what we have here is called leveraging emerging opportunities. And these would be new things that are going to be helpful to incorporate into students, admissions profile, and then there are actual applications down the road. This can be helpful with scholarships. This can be helpful with, honors programs and things of that nature. So quite a bit to cover tonight, but certainly as you think of questions as we go through, I'll be here to help. And just to give you a little bit of a sense of who I am and what my background is and why I may be able to help with some of your questions tonight, I am Bernadette Smith, the Education Programs Director at Novastar Prep. I've been a licensed high school guidance counselor for over 10 years at both public and private high schools, very large public high school in Massachusetts and a smaller private high school in Massachusetts as well. I have 15 plus years as a writing tutor, an ELA tutor, a college coach, and a college English instructor. So certainly the essay was always a part that I really enjoyed working with students on, but the full college coaching experience, both as a guidance counselor and when I started here at Novastar Prep years ago as a college coach. So I try to keep up with everything going on in admissions. We all do in the field. And so this is meant to be helpful to you as you wonder what's going on this year or what might be coming in the next several years as you plan ahead for your student. And just a special thing for everyone tonight, you will have the opportunity to get a special promotion just as a thank you for attending tonight's webinar. It will allow you to buy 10 hours and get 2 free, so it saves you quite a bit, and it's a great way to get started with a college coach. But you can also use it for test prep, any academic subject area, executive functioning skills, anything along those lines. All right, so one thing we're going to start with here is why would the college admissions process be more complicated today? And so there's, 3 things to look at here. One, there's increased competition. Frankly put, more students are applying to colleges than ever before, so it's making admissions more selective than it's ever been before. And then there's also the idea of evolving admissions criteria. So colleges are increasingly emphasizing different experiences, things that are kind of putting students, outside the box in terms of extracurriculars, giving them the ability to showcase unique qualities beyond academics. Kind of what can you do that wasn't required of you at school, or is a little bit different than the way we thought about admissions in the past. And then grade inflation is also a factor here. As the average GPA is growing and rising across schools, students are facing much higher expectations to really set themselves apart in their applications. So this can make it a little bit harder to stand out in the admissions process when several students all have a 4.4 GPA, for example. That wasn't always the case. We'll look at a few stats about that, but these 3 things are definitely affecting college admissions today. We'll also touch on certainly cost and other things of that nature. But these 3 things are some of the reasons why students need to differentiate their applications more so than they had to in the past. And so in terms of the grade inflation explained, this is when the assignment of grades does not align with the content mastery. So, some of the stats that are associated with this and that I saw, in the field at a high school was just really GPAs were increasing. And while that is often due to very good things, it can also be a little bit skewed. So for example, between 2010 and 2022, the average GPA for high school students continued to rise in every single subject. So that's across math, English, science, et cetera. This was a massive study done by the ACT. And one of the things here that the CEO at the ACT noticed at the time is that grade inflation is happening across the entire curriculum. It's most pronounced for mathematics, as average grades in that area have, at the same time, we've seen an alarming decline in mathematics scores and other readiness measures. So what's happening there is the math grade in class is very high, but on any standardized measurement, state level testing, they're not matching up. So that may mean the grade in school is not reflective of the actual content mastery. And again, every student is different. A lot of schools are different. You might be in a traditional high school. You might be in an international baccalaureate high school. You might be at a private school, with different factors affecting the curriculum. But it is important to note that when we see on state level testing and other testing like the SAT or the ACT that there's a decline in those mathematics scores across the board, but students' math GPAs are growing. So again, that's something to think about and to notice that admissions reps are looking at a lot of applications that have very high GPAs on them. Rising high school GPAs reflect a trend where more students are earning A's while fewer receive B's and C's. I certainly saw this a lot in the high school that I worked at, and I'm not trying to say that students weren't earning all of their grades or anything like that, but we have seen, and many of you as parents have likely seen, some changes where, students are allowed to perhaps take a test 3 times, so they have a retake and then another retake, and then they can take the highest grade. That does change things. In the past, we weren't doing that, and so the GPA was what the GPA was. In college, you're more often than not going to be allowed to do a retake. You do hear about stories here and there for a particular class, or maybe they're curving it because everyone did poorly, but it does set students up for a little bit of failure there when they're used to that, or, for example, they're allowed to turn in work very late, like at the end of the semester, rather than being dinged any points there for turning something in late. Because of those things, I've met with families over the last couple of years where they felt that their students were less prepared for cumulative exams in college because they were doing all these retakes with open book opportunities or ability to see the answers and prepare for the next iteration of it, where we're seeing more students coming back to us for help with major cumulative exams at the college level at the end of first semester and second semester, because they're not gaining as much experience with that as they had in the past. We also know that at certain high schools, students are allowed to opt out of finals at certain places, where if they have a certain grade in the class, they don't have to take the final. Again, that can be very tough down the road, and again, plays a little bit of a factor into GPA calculation. So frankly put, this trend reduces the effectiveness of that GPA as an indicator for students' academic success and their overall readiness for college. It's weakened grades as a reliable measure of academic preparedness and college readiness. And we've also seen this with some of the schools coming back with requiring the SAT or the ACT. Tufts University is a great example of this. They went test optional and they did pull it back because they were finding that students were not as ready for college just simply based on their GPA. They needed some of that material from a standardized test to really get a sense of their readiness. I'm a big believer in GPA being a huge indicator, but some things have changed. So they need to be able to have two data points there. And that's often the case when we're looking at GPAs and how they affect college admissions. And just a little bit here about grade inflation by the numbers. It's the highest in math classes, as I mentioned before. So this was a massive 12-year study. And the average GPA just for math increased from a 3.02 to a 3.32. And so here's the thing, from a B to a B plus, and you got to take into consideration, sure, we've got some better resources now. There's more available for students to study online. There's other options, maybe more students are engaging in tutoring and other things like that. But it's a massive increase over that time period when we weren't seeing those types of increases before. And so for the percentage of students in English, math, social studies, and science who reported receiving an A increased by 9.6, 11.4, 10.7, and 12.2 percentage points respectively from 2010 to 2022. And if anybody's curious about this study, I'd be happy to share it with you, because you can see a lot of it's from the ACT report and then Inside Higher Ed in 2023. Grade inflation occurred for all students in the ACT study, which is, a huge consideration here. And the rate of grade inflation was similar for students of all family income groups. So that does kind of, cut into the theory that it's all because somebody's accessing, additional resources and tutoring and boot camps and things like that that you can use. We're seeing that the grades are just increasing. And so, over 37% of students in America are receiving A's right now, as opposed to a few decades ago when A's were less prevalent and around the 15 to 25% range. So that is certainly different. I do think, there's a lot of factors behind this, the adjustments around final exams, retakes, deadlines. We do at times have parents complain about grades to the point where it gets changed in a school, so that didn't used to happen as much. So there's a lot of factors here that colleges are very, very aware of. So now, moving on from grade inflation and all the stats I just gave you there, we're going to talk about the evolving landscape of college admissions and how it's changed over the years. This is going to lead to some strategies, suggestions, and examples that will be helpful for you and your students, and will hopefully give you some ideas as you think about what to do with this summer and looking ahead to the fall semester. So, the changes in college admissions in the last 5 years, we've certainly seen a rise in application volume and overall competition. It's been drastically bigger in my career. One example I always think of is that 2 years ago, Virginia Tech had 56,000 applicants. They have 32,000 students on campus. So imagine the size of the freshman class and that many applicants. And then it's gone up from there. So that's something to think about, that there's just far more people applying and the same number of seats available. Desire for unique and distinctive experiences. College admissions reps are looking at different ways, both holistic and more data points, to evaluate a student. And then certainly, and understandably so, there's rising applications due to public universities rather due to affordability. We do know that there's a student debt crisis in the United States and college costs continually go up. So here's a lot of information here, and I won't bore you to death with all of it, but we certainly are seeing that application volume rise and an increase in competition. So many students now are applying to 10 or more colleges. You know, it's certain high schools that is very much the norm. I can tell you the difference in the last like 12 to 15 years that I've seen. When I first came out of grad school and I was working with students, I had a lot of students applying to 4 schools. You know, 1 reach, 2 target, 1 safety. That was very common, 15 years ago, 12 years ago. Then, I started seeing more students. Frankly, I've had one apply to 26 colleges in a given admissions cycle. Do I think a student loves 26 colleges? Probably not, and that's very costly. But we have seen it go up more because students are feeling, understandably so, that they have more opportunities. The ease of applying has increased as well. Some schools foregoing the SAT component, some schools foregoing the essay component. No, not as many interviews as we used to see, so it has increased that. So NACAC, which is the National Association of College Admissions Counseling, saw that 36% of first-time applicants submitted 7 or more applications in 2021. And that's compared to 9% in 2005. So I can tell you, with the vast majority of the students I've worked with as a college coach in the last several years, that's definitely on target. I'm saying I would typically see 10 to 12. So that's at least what we're seeing. And selective colleges are certainly seeing record applications. Harvard reported a 7% increase in applications from 2022, and that made their acceptance rate 3.4%. We've seen that one fluctuate a little bit. There's always kind of a bit of a battle between, is Stanford or Harvard or Yale harder to get into? And sometimes it's 2.9 at Stanford and then 3.1 at Harvard. But certainly, when you're seeing more applicants, you can't suddenly build new buildings and dormitories and hire more professors and accommodate all of those applications, even if everybody's very qualified. And then simply because of the Common App growing to more schools, they've also seen a 21% increase in submitted applications from 2019 to 2023. So if you think about what happened then, right before 2019, we were starting to see some schools go test optional. I had a list, I think, in my office of 400 schools that were test optional at the time. And then it really rose to 1,100. COVID happened and we suspended it all. And now it's starting to come back. So if we have students applying to a lot more, that accounts for, because there were places that students didn't feel like they could apply to before, and now they can. Places where they saw before a huge barrier in terms of an SAT score, where now they were able to submit. So there were 7 million applications submitted in 2022, 2023, and I believe it was around the same for last year's application cycle as well. High school graduation rates are going up, which is fantastic, and happy to see that. I do know, though, that sometimes we're seeing some students graduate when they may not be ready. Certainly that is not across the board, but there are some students where we're seeing that be the case. And then it's just easy to apply to a lot of schools. It's kind of like, for those of you parents on LinkedIn, it's like clicking the easy apply button sometimes. It can be really easy just to add a bunch more. A lot of times they'll have days where they're offering, a free application, or they're always a free application. So the ease of it certainly makes a difference. That being said, seeing all these applicants, colleges are starting to look for something beyond grades. Grades are still very important, but 68% of officers prioritize meaningful extracurriculars. So again, this is going to be going, the value of the extracurriculars over the volume of extracurriculars. So we want to be looking not necessarily to have 17 things listed for activities, but 4 or 5 really meaningful accomplishments, activities, participations, leadership experiences from the high school experience. And impact matters. 60% of the officers in this study, and again, NACAC is huge. Every college belongs to it. They have massive conferences every year. Colleges report out to them. They're looking for students who have a positive impact in their community or on their field-specific experiences. So whether that's community service in your local area, or if you're very interested in a particular type of research that you've been contributing to that, or you've been shadowing somebody in the field during your high school experience, really showing that specific targeted type of experience and showing a positive impact. And then this is something we didn't really think about years ago, personal branding. Competitive schools want to see a clear, cohesive story. So in marketing, obviously we talk about branding all the time. Now students have a brand when they're applying to college. What is their overall, story? What are their unique interests and how do they tie into their future goals? I think putting it this way can help students really, hone in on what it is they're trying to do. And not that we expect them to know everything, but really showing that, for example, if a student has always been a gymnast and then their job when they were able to start working was to work at the gym they used to train at, and then they're also interested in health sciences and perhaps physical therapy, like showing a connection between all the things, a love for a sport, a love for teaching it, interest in sciences, kind of tying all those things together and what that brand might be. And then, frankly, and I'm sure everyone here is aware of this, rising applications to public universities. Certainly, this has been the case here in Massachusetts. The University of Massachusetts Amherst is our flagship school. And when I was in high school, you could get in with a 3.0. Now it is a 3.9 in-state, 3.7 out of state, and they just frankly have so many applications. They don't know what to do with it. And it's a fantastic university, absolutely fantastic, but they've seen a huge increase in applications. And so, we've got a student debt crisis that's 1.6 trillion, and students are looking for affordable education options, and their families are hopefully guiding them accordingly to look for those options, because student debt, as we know, can be very crippling for students. So that's a lot of information about what's kind of changed, why we're seeing increased applications. If you have any questions about that, feel free to pop it into the chat. But for now, we'll move on to starting early and planning ahead. So when should your student get started? So before I go to the next screen, if you are the parent of a rising senior right now, please do not panic that I'm listing 7th grade here. There's still so much you can do, but we're just talking about how you can span several years of building this, so there's a little less stress later on. But all of these steps and all of these different positions on kind of this ladder leading to college application day can be applied at multiple ages. So bear with me on that. But the reason we want to see students start early is getting that strong foundation. That's going to allow more for consistent growth in academics, activities, so that maybe you're becoming a captain on a team, or maybe something, moving from JV to varsity to captain, leadership roles, within the school. And it also gives you some time for strategic choices. That's going to allow students to identify and pursue specific and unique interests, and then it will also allow them to really plan coursework with their school counselor and with their families around, okay, if I take this class by this time, can I take AP Pre-Calc and then AP Calc? And just giving yourself enough time in the school year, or allowing yourself to have room senior year for a specific internship you were going to have at school, or if you're trying to make room for a dual enrollment class. As a mental health provider, as a school counselor, my favorite part of this is reducing last minute pressure. Students stress themselves out, greatly when putting things to the last minute. So if you can spread out college prep over years, you can avoid the stress when they have all this homework on top of them, and they're taking the SAT, and they've got all these other things to do as a junior, as a sophomore, rising senior. And then it really allows you to dive into depth over quantity. So this is like really finding those activities that mean something to them, or something that they're creating that is a passion of theirs, rather than, going to the school activity fair and joining every club for the sake of it. This will allow students to really deep dive into their interests over a span of time, show growth within that, and show commitment to it. And then frankly, it just makes students more competitive in the long run. It's going to foster sustained achievement. Students that start working on this earlier have better outcomes when it comes time to apply. You can stand out amid those rising applications that we've talked about. And so again, here's the part where I say 7th, 8th slash ninth grade because we're all in different positions and students' interests change. And that's why I put identifying interests and goals as part of this, kind of figuring out what are they very good at that they also like and also aligns with their values. With a 7th grader, sometimes it's hard to dig into that. Other times there are kids who know what they want to be since they were 5. Other times it's changed 52 times and it's going to change 52 more. But when you start to identify these things, it doesn't mean you have to be married to that pathway, but that you're thinking about it. Working with the student's counselor and teachers to plan for those future courses. If we know a student's particularly interested in STEM, we're going to want to make sure that they're doing well enough in honors level classes to get into that next AP class that they need, or to be able to take a dual enrollment course and give themselves the time to do it so they're not rushing. And for ninth grade in general, it's really continuing to explore those interests as students start to understand themselves better, knowing that they're still 14 and 15 years old, and we don't expect them to have their entire lives planned out, but how can we make that whole plan a little bit more concrete? And this is where joining meaningful activities and clubs can be very important. I'm going to show you a bunch of, traditional activities and kind of some modern ones that are coming up, but thinking about what really matters to your student. If they hate track and field, it's not about joining track and field, right? It's about what club should they be in that semester? Should they be doing Special Olympics? Should they be doing Best Buddies? Are they more interested in research and scholarly endeavors rather than that? Or are they a student who wants to be a 3-season athlete and needs to fit it in with all their schoolwork? We want to make sure it's meaningful and purposeful. Purposeful would be the biggest part of it, is that we're not doing it just to do it. We're building an overall profile. Certainly in 10th grade, this is where we want students to take the PSAT, and I do recommend a mock SAT or ACT at that time, because you can establish a true baseline and figure out if you're the type of student who should be testing earlier or if you should be testing a little bit later. And then we want to start planning for that test prep accordingly, like I just mentioned. Sometimes it's lining up with your math class. Other times it's if you get a certain score as a rising 11th grader, you're going to want to take it at a certain times. Different things if you're taking it in second semester of junior year, whatever it might be. And then you can continue to develop academic goals and extracurriculars. And so that will be important there, because we know junior year is a very important year in terms of college applications. It's going to be the most fresh information that admissions reps have if you're applying, especially early action in November 1st, November 15th, December 1st. Odds are they're just going to get your mid-year report in January, and they may have already made a decision by then. So that's why it's really important to think about this in phases and really give your kids a chance to look at things that they might be interested in. There's plenty of tools out there where they can take interest profiles. Obviously, Naviance has that built in, and other school learning systems that are similar to that. There's a free one with the ACT website where they can learn about their values and strengths and everything that they're interested in. Give them a chance to look at these things, because sometimes students don't even know all the things out there that they could potentially study, and maybe have attached themselves to one thing, and there could be something else out there for them. And then in terms of setting long-term goals, this is what I mentioned at the bottom of 10th grade there, but we also want to think about it earlier. And in some school districts, we know if you're taking certain accelerated classes in 7th and 8th grade, that they can count towards your GPA. You would already be aware of this. This is not something they're springing on you, but just keep that in mind. An academic goal here can be a specific GPA, specific advanced courses. If you want to be in a specific honors or AP program, it could be, specific to, different, classes that you can take at the local community colleges. Extracurricular goals, you want to make sure that you're looking at objectives for sports, clubs, community service, and making sure it aligns with your interests and those potential career aspirations. I certainly did not know when I was 14 that I was going to be a guidance counselor and then work in marketing and then do other things like that. So we don't expect kids to have it all figured out, but we do expect them to have, some cohesion in their profiles showing that they're working towards something. You can change your major sophomore year. You can change your direction. There's students that go back to school and, become nurses later on and change all these things. But it's really important to make sure that you're building this profile and showing them, long-term commitment to it. And then certainly leadership roles continue to be very important. They want to be able to seek those type of positions that show time management skills and unique skills valuable to the college admissions process. So knowing that they can manage multiple things at once. So if you're in a leadership position and you're putting on an event at school, but you've also got a massive test that week and a lab report due, that you're able to manage multiple things. Great example here are students that work on the play. If any of you have kids that are in musical theater or in the theater group for the plays that are not the musicals, that takes up a lot of time. And balancing that with schoolwork, the late nights, things like that can be really, really trying. If those of you that have students who do track, sometimes their track meets don't end until 9 o'clock at night. Balancing those things and also being a leader while you're there is huge. And then, for long-term goals, just regular check-ins can be really helpful. And this can be with teachers, counselors, tutors. I do recommend a college coach if you're feeling like this is very overwhelming. That can be super helpful for planning out this summer, this fall, knowing that we're checking all the boxes. It helps prevent a lot of regret later on as well. And saying, what if I had joined this? What if I had looked for an internship? It can help ease that and really give you reassurance that you're on the right path. All right, so that was a lot of information there as well. So what we're going to talk about now is more specifics with those extracurricular activities. I can give myself a minute for some water. If you guys want to throw any questions in, feel free. But some of these you may be aware of. Some of them are a little bit newer and just different ways to look at it. So we've got some traditional extracurriculars that I think we're all aware of that many of us did, joining clubs at school. It's the yearbook, student government. I was in Amnesty International Club, different things like that, or, students that are in, chorus or band, and usually that's a class, but also an outside activity as well. Sports, any one of the numerous athletic teams at the student's high school. Volunteer work, are they tutoring for NHS? Do they do community service at the soup kitchen? Are they volunteering at Special Olympic events? These are very common, still fantastic, but these would be what we would consider the traditional experiences. Some of the things we're looking at for more modern approaches, which help set students apart, would be formal research. This can come in the form of science fairs, academic research projects, working at a local college with professors that are there, finding that really formalized research process. Internships. This can be shadowing professionals, really structured summer internships. We see a lot of those at hospitals. I've seen students do it at an architecture firm to have an internship for the summer. Definitely, in seeing kids shadowing parents and things like that at marketing firms and other places, or they happen to know somebody and they want to learn more about day-to-day business operations. Those can all be helpful. Community-based projects. Are your students doing anything that's doing like a social impact initiative? I've worked with kids before who were very into cleaning up their town. Like they would have a day every week where they were in charge of picking up trash in a certain area of town, and they had it all planned about how they were going to go through different areas and beautify the town they were proud to live in. I've had students start a nonprofit before. We've had students raise money for, causes that are very near and dear to their hearts, whether it's something going on in current events, something related to the church they might be a part of, something related to maybe cancer affecting their family and doing something for the American Cancer Society. Anything like that can really set somebody apart, especially if you're very involved in it, trying to make an impact. And then, certainly over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot with entrepreneurial ventures. So students running their own businesses, starting a blog, having a YouTube channel. I've worked with students who have run their own thing almost the entire time they're in high school. So they have quite the portfolio to show. And these are things that students are very familiar with. They're very tech savvy. They can use a lot of these things. And so obviously traditional or new approaches, which one should you do? Both. They're both still very important. We don't want to ditch the ones from before. Being an active member of your school community is very important, whether that's on the athletic fields or it's in a club for student government, whatever it might be, these things are important. So now moving on to the specifics here of finding research opportunities. There's a million out there and you want to hone in on the ones that you know, meet certain criteria for you, that you want to find out if it's meant for rising sophomores, is it meant for a freshman in high school, is it meant for the summer before senior year? But a lot of universities offer summer research internships for high school students, especially in the STEM field. I've seen some in humanities and social sciences for sure, but you'll see a lot of STEM programs. And I've seen a lot of them, for example, at Worcester Polytechnic Institute up here in Massachusetts. Virginia Tech has programs that run during the summer. UVA certainly does as well. So there's things to look into there, but then also nationally, the Research Science Institute at MIT has internships during the summer. RISE at the University of Freiburg, and science internships at the University of California. If you look up a list of this, it's miles long. So, certainly there's a lot to sift through, but these are just some examples. But students can also contact faculty members directly at a local school about potential openings for assisting with ongoing projects. They may not always get a response. They may get someone who's like, I can't put you in the whole thing, but I can have you shadow a few days, but I've definitely had students where it's been a huge success and they ended up building a relationship with that faculty member and ended up attending that university. So there's a lot that can be useful there, or they got a letter of recommendation out of it from working with a college professor already. Then there's also national research programs. So the National Institutes of Health, they have a summer internship program, National Science Foundation, National Academy of Sciences. There's Intel puts on an international science and engineering fair. So there's a lot out there. And these do have deadlines well in advance. So you definitely want to look at these ahead of time because they're, as you can imagine, very competitive. So you want to prepare early for these. But there's no shortage of them out there. So just looking for something that appeals to your students' particular interests. If they're into machine learning, if they're into robotics, if there's a specific type of engineering they might like, there's definitely a lot that as you search for it, you can find a lot there. You can ask ChatGPT to sift through them if you'd like to get a, based on certain criteria for your student, and then double check it for accuracy, of course. But there's a lot out there for like summer writing programs for students more interested in the humanities, journalism type programs, doing some things like that at a local newspaper. So those are definitely things students can look for. And then you can find a lot of different research opportunities just through online platforms. There's ResearchGate. I've definitely had students go to citysci.org to find different opportunities. Just a lot of project fairs and science project fairs. There's a lot for environmental science there. I've seen a lot more like NASA related for space exploration. So if you have a student who's looking at, aeronautical engineering or something like that, these can be great to look at. Then, there's also nonprofits out there and think tanks that students can research, look at their internship opportunities and see if they're a good match. There's the American Museum of Natural History in New York. There's the American Antiquarian Society in Worcester, Massachusetts. There's the RAND Corporation. There's so many here. Local nonprofits can also be really helpful with this as well to do some potential research. There's times where, they might start just doing more data collection or data entry, but it can lead to some more things. Then there's, science fairs and competitions. Google Science Fair is a big one. Broadcom has one as well, to have students really engage in research, fully develop a project, and present it to experts. This is, typically original research that students need to do. There's times where some of them can be in partners or small groups, other times where it's the individual student and a faculty advisor or a program advisor, but there's a chance to gain valuable experience working with a mentor or really trying to manage a project like this while managing other responsibilities. One of the other last things here that a lot of science museums will offer internships. So whichever one is closest to you, definitely worth reaching out and seeing what they have. Even if your student may start there taking tickets at the front desk, then they have a connection and then they can meet with other people there, poke around and learn about what they might be most interested in. And last but not least, I strongly suggest talking to a local or college librarian. They are an absolute wealth of information. they may know somebody who's coming in doing a lot of research. They may be able to point you to the right professor because they're aware of their research ongoing projects. So if all, and I would actually probably even start here. These are all great ideas, but talk to somebody nearby. There might be a really unique opportunity and you just happen to pop by your town's library and learn about it, or you can go to a college librarian as well for that. So certainly lots of different ways to find research opportunities. It's definitely important to look into, but I think sifting through the number of them is probably the most challenging part, but there is a lot out there and a lot you can do to separate yourself from other students. The next piece would be seeking internships and entrepreneurship opportunities. This is where I strongly suggest, and this would be in both categories, lean on your community. Are you interested in medicine? Does your student, have a particular interest, as I mentioned before, in physical therapy? Do they want to be a phlebotomist? Do they want to do certain things? See if there's something they can do at your doctor's office or through friends or colleagues just to do a shadow or to learn about, the day-to-day work that goes into things. They may even maybe they don't get an internship, but they interview somebody in the field and make something of that. Certainly work with your school counselor. I always loved when kids came to me saying like, what internships are out there? What are you aware of that would be a good match for me? Because oftentimes counselors aren't going through their whole list of students being like, here's an internship for Bob, here's an internship for Sadia, here's an internship for Mary. They're go to them and then it might spark something. I would also strongly suggest working with a college coach to find pertinent opportunities. Once you get that great working relationship, the college coach really knows you and can help you find those opportunities that would help you stand out, that they've seen be successful before. They have the day-to-day expertise in that area. For entrepreneurship, I've seen a lot of this, like an Instagram account that sells a product and has a following. I had a student that they sold jam, like they made jam and they sold jam and it all went to charity. It was a beautiful project and something that I would strongly recommend if your student is talented in a cooking way. I think one of the things people are talking about like now is grandma core. They do, they're crocheting and they're doing knitting work and needlepoint and things like that. Maybe they are a graphic designer and they can create that on Instagram and get a good following. I've met students and worked with students who have their own LLC and like actually created a full-blown company. Starting a YouTube channel. I mentioned that one before about something that you're passionate about and should relate to your goals. I mean, yeah, for example, there's a lot of different YouTube accounts out there that certainly wouldn't be appropriate to share with a college admissions counselor. But if you're really into gaming, for example, and you want to go into video game design, there's ways to tweak a gaming live stream YouTube channel to be more educational and things like that. So maybe you can take a different approach and have it be more about learning more about the development of games. And then have your student build a website for their babysitting business, and then they can share it with people, create QR codes, get more clients, show how they're, how long they've had it last, how many clients they've served. They may even end up hiring one of their friends to be a secondary babysitter. There's, anything like that that's a skill a student's using. I had a student do that with like shoveling their neighbors' driveways. That was something that set them apart. And then they ended up doing more of that and, meeting new people and being really active in their neighborhood. And then it turned into mowing their lawns in the summer. So look for those unique opportunities. Entrepreneurship, you can certainly look up classes and certifications. And I strongly recommend if there's anybody that you know that you may want to interview about this, that can be great too. But Instagram is a great place to start. YouTube can be fantastic, great opportunities to put a little bit of that brand we talked about out there. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about academic excellence, and we'll dive into this and kind of how it's more than just grades, but of course grades are still very important, and we'll get into that particular piece. I don't see any questions yet in the Q&A, so I'll assume everybody's all set for right now, and then we can go into challenging yourself. So having your student take rigorous courses, AP, IB, honors, can really show commitment and academic strength. That being said, you don't want to overload and cause it to be so challenging that the grades dip across the board, right? You know your student, they know themselves. If AP calculus isn't for them, don't force it. There's another opportunity there. You know, are they going to get a stronger grade in honors calc rather than AP calc and have a much better experience and do well in their other courses because they're not as stressed from AP calc? Then that's the right choice to make. You got to really balance it out. Of course, I've worked with students who have taken 8 or 9 APs over high school and then some independently. And sure, that can be fantastic, but if it's going to negatively affect another class or multiple classes, it might not be worth it. Colleges definitely value students who excel in that challenging coursework so it can show their ability to handle college level material. So showing that in a few areas can be really great. They want to make sure you can do what's required of you once you get to campus. And like I said, it's focus on quality, performing well and showing growth. Advanced classes are great, but if you can show your best version of yourself and all honors or, you know, depending on your school and what you call it, you know, standard levels. I know we had one called college prep, then honors, then AP, you know, whatever it might be. Balance your schedule out to set yourself up for the most success while also challenging yourself. You know, you do also want to pursue academic interests that are outside the classroom. So summer programs and online courses. There is no shortage of online courses available to students today, some at no cost. Dual enrollment classes is something I've always encouraged my students to do over years because it really showcases not only your ability to take something more challenging that's off campus that you have to alter your day for, very much like it would be in college where you're leaving to go to this class, then coming back. But it shows your ability to do college level coursework while managing everything you else have going on as your regular high school day, your, you know, 8 to 3 p.m. and then you have sports and then you've got driving school and then you've got something else going on. Dual enrollment classes can be fantastic for this. And, you know, in certain cases, it ends up being college credit that you can take on. And it's something that you can certainly send the transcript from that school to the college you're applying to. Then, as I mentioned before, independent research projects or joining internships to further strengthen your academic profile. So before we talked about it more as an extracurricular, here's about strengthening your overall profile. If you are absolutely fascinated by a particular period in history, and in school you just covered it for a little bit and you want to do independent research, that can be something you can include in additional information on the Common App, just that you dove into this for years. Or one of the Common App questions, for example, is tell us about a topic that is just so interesting to you that you lose time thinking about it and focusing on it. That could be a chance. You know, I had somebody that it was about battle tactics in a specific war, and they were so fascinated by it and, you know, going on to be a history major and things like that, where they really set themselves apart and show that they are capable of research independently. So things like that can be tremendous, and certainly you can reach out for help at the library or with teachers, but that can be a great opportunity to just show how passionate you are about something. Now, like we're talking about like building that cohesive narrative. So this all relates to the brand, eventually to the college essay, kind of what does it all mean that we're doing all these things? So I'm joining this club, I'm participating in this sport, I'm shadowing so-and-so at work. What does it all mean? And what should admissions take from that? If they look at your entire application and they say, so what? We didn't answer the question. We want to be able to answer, so what? What does this all mean? And the way you can help your students here too is to identify key elements of that personal brand. Academic achievements, extracurricular activities, their passions, their personal values. If you know, like there's certain kids you can just tell the way they value their friendships and care for them, that it maybe relates greatly to becoming somebody working in a helping profession. And then you can keep pulling out from that. Okay, this is because then she does this type of volunteer work and then went in and did this kind of psychology course over the summer to learn more about counseling. You can connect all of these things together. And like I say, in the next one, tie it all together. Themes that connect their experiences and reflect their personality. You know, it's again, I can't stress enough that it's not just doing things for the sake of doing them. Everything should have some kind of meaning behind it. Obviously, they have to do a certain amount of community service to graduate, but it should be something they like and something that they care about. Um, then consistency. We want to make sure that the record academically, activities, and personal statement align to present that cohesive message. For example, if your college essay is all about how much you love STEM, and like, let's say it's particularly about engineering, but you didn't take a lot of challenging science classes in school, didn't do any research, then the story's a little less connected. You want to make sure all three of them come together. And then you want to help highlight what makes them stand out. What about their story is different from other applicants? And that can feel very difficult for the student, but you as a parent know what makes your child special. And, and they may not agree with you, but there's other things about what they've done and what they've gone through that can tie into this whole personal brand. We're not selling something fake. This is who they really are, and trying to make it so, they are able to pull that out on the admission side of things and really learn more about your student. They're going to spend not a lot of time on the application itself, and we're seeing fewer and fewer interviews. So this is a chance over time to tell a story and then tie it in at the end. And then, you can help your students show their progression. The biggest thing I say about the trajectory over 9th grade to applying in senior year and the college essay is to demonstrate growth. That's the biggest, most important thing a student can do, showing how they've evolved. It doesn't always have to be academic growth. It can be a personal, social experience that they've grown through, resiliency, something that they've, been challenged with during their time in high school and really, made significant gains in it. Link those past experiences. We want to think about high school activities with goals for college and beyond. And you also want to connect with the college. The narrative should show how your experiences line with the college's values or what you contribute to their community. And I don't mean writing in an essay that it's like, I want to go to Virginia Tech because. Obviously, you're going to write an essay down the road that is for all of the colleges you're applying to, because you're going to submit it on the Common App. But this is really thinking about it like Virginia Tech, for example, cares a lot about community service. They are a service-driven university. That's something, if that's your dream school, you should be doing community service. You should be engaging in things that are connected to your interests, that are connected to making a positive impact. There's other schools that are way more into research. They're research institutions. You're going into a research field, you should be doing those things. You want to make all the connections across there. And then lastly, I know we're coming up on the last 7 minutes here, just some things about leveraging emerging opportunities. Creating a digital portfolio. Years ago, it used to be very testing and frustrating to help students upload their art portfolios to different college applications. There were issues with the size of the image and the aspect ratio of this, and it has to be from this angle, and how did you photograph that sculpture, and is it like it was very hard to upload those things years and years ago. But now a lot of times they just have students put in a link to show their achievements. So this goes beyond having simply an art portfolio for our art students out there, or clips from, if you're being a dance major, from different things that you've done with dance over the years. This can be a place where you have your academic achievements, projects, extracurricular activities, and leadership roles. You can also view this the same way as a personal website. As you see here, it can serve as an online resume and portfolio. LinkedIn can be great. You're supposed to be 18 to join it, though. So, some of our older seniors who turn 18 in September or October can certainly try this. But, it's something that does have an age restriction on it, but it can be nice moving forward, or if they get it, a little while into senior year and they're applying regular decision, they can certainly show that they've made connections, that they're networking. And basically, these are just very easy for admissions officers to access and assess. They can get to this by following a link very easily, rather than downloading 16 different files, pulling up the PDF of your resume. This makes it just so much smoother. And then they can get right to the most important parts. And just some modern ways to stand out, micro-credentials and online certifications. Coursera has plenty of free things on there, edX. Google has plenty of certificates, some of them free, some of them like 20 bucks and not that bad. Just they show some passion for a particular subject area. Like I said about, a student who's particularly interested in history. If you're taking one, there will be a place to mention it, even though you're not getting credit for it or you're not getting, something that is going to count towards school or a grade. This can be a really great way of showing just how invested you are in learning. Schools want to see that you choose to learn outside the classroom as well. And then creative content creations. Our writers out there should be writing blogs, get their thoughts out there, maybe a podcast for our students that are looking to go into communication and broadcasting. Managing that YouTube or a Substack, that can be really interesting in terms of academic interests and can really show, again, we're going beyond the classroom. Being a great student is fantastic. Do you also love to learn? Are you a lifelong learner? And then certainly there's some global experiences like virtual exchanges, online academic programs that students can do. There's different things out there to communicate with people in different languages, to practice your conversational Mandarin, for example. There's things that students can do there. So no shortage of ways to stand out, but it's just about picking what really tells your student's story and shows depth and value versus trying to do 400 things. We want to do certain things very well rather than trying to do a million things, with a mediocre approach, so to speak. And then just the last couple things here, we have new avenues for research and innovation, science fairs, we talked about those a little bit before, research competitions, certainly helpful. Get involved with a project. We've seen like local startup incubators that want to hear from young people. If you're looking at commercials today, they're talking about how 10-year-olds are already building businesses on AI. So there's mentorship and resources out there for teens that have really innovative ideas. And then these opportunities demonstrate leadership, a willingness to take risks and not be the smartest person in the room, innovation, and just being really proactive. These are traits that college admissions really wants to see. All right, so here are my last takeaways, just to review everything we talked about. Just starting early. And again, this is not meant to be scary to the parents of rising seniors. You still have all summer to build some more things into your student's profile. And of course, they've been doing things over the last few years. It's about pulling those all together. For our younger students and parents in the audience tonight, it's helpful to give thought to this. Use some of the summer months to think about this. Jot down what your goals really are. Do a SMART goal, for example, of something you'd like to achieve by the end of the summer. If you're really unsure, meet with a college coach and learn a little bit more about yourself. They can walk you through some interest inventories, talk to you about different careers that are out there. And all students, working with a college coach just offers so much reassurance that as you go through the whole process, you're checking every box and you're feeling like you're on top of everything and you're not missing out. Then encourage those unique and meaningful experiences. This is everything we just talked about. Internships, research, entrepreneurship, show curiosity. And then last but not least, help your student tell that story. Build that personal brand that's essential for college admissions today. Show that cohesive story. Tell them who they are beyond their GPA and beyond their SAT or ACT score. Help them stand out. All right, any questions from the audience right now I know we've got 1 minute left, but I'm happy to stay for a question or two. And I'll put up on the screen while I'm seeing if anyone types in a question, just that we have some upcoming events for you to take a peek at. I'll send you guys all the links for this, certainly. But this is something, you can do this weekend because we do have, oops, hold on, let me pull that back up. Sorry about that. We do have an ACT mock test this Saturday. So if you want to compare an ACT score to an SAT score you might have, or if you've taken a mock test with us and want to compare the ACT to the SAT, great opportunity for that. There's also an SAT boot camp this weekend. And I'm just going to put the links for this in the chat so that you all have it. I'll put it in an email as well, but just so everyone has it there, so that you can see a boot camp opportunity that's kind of a small approach to it. It's 8 hours over the weekend, mock ACT on Saturday. Then we also have, let me see here, perfect. Some classes running this summer for students with a 1200 plus SAT starting score that can be on a mock test. We have an SAT Edge class. For students with a 1350 plus, we have a SAT 1500 class that is geared towards moving that in the 1400s and 1500s and, as far as it can go. We also have college admissions boot camp this summer that will be very helpful to rising seniors, as well as our college essay workshop that can be added into the college admissions boot camp or taken separately. So all of these opportunities are out there for you. I will send you all the links to them. Again, I don't see any questions just yet, so it sounds like hopefully everyone is all set, but I'll send you all the links for this. I'll send you the video recording of tonight's presentation. I'll send you a link to book a consultation so you can take advantage of that buy 10 hours, get 2 free. And I'll be here to be your resource. So if you think of a question 10 hours from now, 10 days from now, 10 months from now, you can email me and let me know. So I thank you all for your attendance tonight. I'm happy to see some people join and be really interested in this topic. Throughout the summer, you can expect more. We definitely have a college essay webinar. We have one related to the actual applications themselves, certainly SAT related webinars, a lot going on this summer that will be helpful to you and your students. So I guess that's it for tonight, everyone. Thank you so much for your time and expect some communication from me shortly with the recording and other helpful information. Thank you all and good night.